Caution, contents hot. 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 You got to give me all you got. Caution, contents hot. You got to give me all you got. Caution, contents hot. You get to give me all you got.
You can't beat that! It's a triple! Make it a quadra! Make it a pentakill for Z-Tan! Can he defend it? He's got a double kill! The power got it! And that's it! That is it! Dark Omen, get it! Eyes on the Titan! Zoinks in the Titan room! Aegis on the Searing Pain! And he gets it! Capri ultimate! And it was the Morgan! And now the real Capri pulls through!
Me all you got.
He just rolled the fire charge! He grinded! He grinded! No, he real grinded! First time we've seen all game. Turning around, he's striking. Oh no, my god! The turnaround! He's crazy! Huge stun! Oh my god! The double Thor! Into the double! Tactical faders! Was an underdog all season long! But now they can call themselves Smite Draft League Champions! As they're finding out that the big, bad, remarkable wolf, their house was made of straw, blowing it wide open. They will take it. Sunbreakers in 4. At the start of the season, the sun rose to the sky, and in all 3 divisions, it's been broken. Dark Omen is on death's door. Can they make the play happen? Radvilk has a double. Will anyone do it? No! No one will stop the Sunbreakers! The league has been shattered! It's in darkness! It's Sunbreakers dominance! And they take the godlike finals!
Caution, contents hot.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Smite Draft League's lower division playoff panel. We're here to speculate which teams will be great and which will deflate as we wait for playoffs to initiate. Joining me is some of our fantastic casting talent. We got Gearchief, Suun, and Ken Akamaru in the house. Thanks for being here, guys. How we all feeling?
I'm a bit insulted you didn't introduce me as the little cog champ, but that's something we'll take on.
That's your alter ego, man. We gotta.
It's all one thing, dog.
Valid. Cog champ, welcome to the board. Suun, Ken, man, how we feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. I've been kind of MIA the last few weeks, but I'm back and I'm ready for playoffs.
Yeah, I'm
Very
feeling
good.
great myself. It's gonna be a great one.
Absolutely. And lads, let's just jump right on into it. Let's start off with some nice unstoppable chatter here. Unstoppable, right? Rightfully being treated as a legitimate division, and as such is being given equal gem payout as the other divisions come finals. What is different, however, is the amount of games that are being broadcast for it. What do you guys think the impact is when both you and your opponents don't have that game tape to look back on? Ken, I'm gonna start with you.
Yeah, it's tough, man. When you don't have that when you don't have that VOD review to go back on directly, at least through the league itself, that means that your ability to watch back on your own games is kind of limited to whatever you record or whatever you get within like the 3 days grace period of being able to spectate your games. It definitely becomes a little harder, and I've run into issues with that with like playing games in other leagues where you don't have that kind of that same production that SDL does for you. And so you got to be a little more on top of it. You got to be watching your games back, and you got to be making sure that you're getting that stuff in as soon as possible. There are a lot of really great players in Unstoppable, and I think that these teams have really been working to keep up on that, especially because there's so much competition in there. It's just they got to keep up with it, and I think they will, and I think we're going to see some really fun stuff out of them.
Absolutely. Suun, Gear, anything to add to that?
I think it's just a reliance. You got to start relying more on scrims than anything. So where you can just kind of look back and just kind of do some individual review. So I remember my first season of SDL, that's what I was doing at work. I was kind of at lunchtime, I was looking at some of our backfield casts, but now you're kind of subject to playing with the team, so it kind of relies on the team being a bit more of a unit than the other leagues.
Son, you?
I think a big thing that comes out of it is the fact that KDA doesn't tell you everything. I mean, all these captains have access to the match reports, and so they can see, 2-0 this team, 2-0 that team, 2-1 this team, that kind of thing. And so, and then they can see the KDAs from the screenshots. But again, the screenshots don't necessarily tell you everything about the team. And I mean, sometimes, like an Anher, he might have had a lot of kills in one game, and then also died a lot in the next game if it was picked the 2 games back to back. And he could have been playing incredibly safe both those games, but still got a lot of kills and then got dove a lot in the process and died a lot. So it's very difficult just off of screenshots, and so because of that, it's hard to tell exactly how these matchups will be, especially, if you faced a team week 1 or week 2. I mean, that was how many weeks ago at this point? So it's so hard to remember exactly how those players played and how to know the matchup when you're going into the playoffs here. And again, because some of these teams haven't played in just such an incredibly long period of time.
Yeah, very valid points all. I mean, you have those blanks, right? And like you said, those slash lines do not tell you everything there is to know about the game and its progress and its procession. So you have to try to maybe assume a little bit, but as the phrase goes, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me, and you don't want to be losing your playoffs run from one of those assumptions. So best make sure you're doing your homework, whatever resources you can scrounge up, make sure you're doing your summer reading. It's going to come in handy for these playoffs matchups. So let's keep it on moving here. Setting the meta scene here. Season of celebrations upon us, baby. We are quite literally letting our players cook. Recipes are a new addition to the game. Not one we've really gotten to cast much for. Given gamers' affinity for frozen meals, I'm a bit worried about how they'll adjust. But what are the implications that we see from this feature in general, and how do we think it'll interplay specifically within the lower divisions? Gear, I'm going to start with you for this one.
I think one big thing you start to look at is that golden bow substitute. That's everything everyone's been talking about when it comes to these recipes. So I think we're going to see a lot of that abuse coming from the duo lane and the cooldown one as well. I myself haven't played very much of this season with those recipes, so I can't really tell how we're going to see it a lot in the Unstoppable. But I can just tell it's going to be definitely a race to try to get that golden bow up as soon as possible, just to start farming your opponent. Because if you can get it up significantly sooner, then the big issue is that it's just you just had a whole other advantage. But one thing I will say, which is interesting, is that it doesn't favor some gods essentially. So a lot of the older items, you got stacking items, right? Which was just who can clear better or who can do whatever. But they're not necessarily stacks, right? So people or gods like Baba Yaga can't really abuse it. So I think it's a very good equalizer when it comes to that, because we've seen Baba Yaga be able to abuse it with Karen's coin and low kill games, or especially when it comes to the cloak, the prophetic, right? You want just easy protections, there you go. You don't have to fight for them. But this definitely evens the playing field. So I think it might allow some teams to kind of stem bleeding that might otherwise be there coming from, say, an item advantage or something like that.
Very good points all. I mean, like you said, leveling the play field in some ways, but also, like you mentioned, sometimes because it's newer feature and it's these lower divisions, it might be a bit of a learning curve here. Hopefully, once again, these teams have been kind of practicing up, studying up a little bit, making sure that you're prepared, because if enough teams optimize on it heavily enough, it's going to be a big gap. Especially, I know when people hear the words golden bow, they start to kind of shiver in fear a little bit, remembering the golden days of that item. Bringing that back in any capacity is a scary thing. Sun, Ken, anything to add on to there? Anything that Gear might have missed in your opinions for what recipes bring to the table?
The cooldown one is just OP. I think it's good on every single god in the game. You can never complain about having extra cooldowns, at all, and it's so easy to stack that one. You just use abilities and you damage people. It's not hard. It's super easy. Every god can do it. And so because of that, free cooldown for everybody, I think that we're going to be seeing a lot of that in the playoffs for sure. And then obviously a little bit of, golden bow coming back out for some hunters a little bit too over there in the dual lane side, so definitely going to see that over there as well. But I just think cooldowns we're going to be seeing out the wazoo on every single build.
Yeah, I think a thing to address with this as well is that this is a very open meta. There aren't a whole lot of strategies that are like super figured out, especially since SPL in Phase 3 tends to hide a lot of strategies from people who are watching. And so we see a meta where in this division of competitive play, there isn't a whole lot that's been super figured out. There's no one right way to do it just yet. And so this unstoppable bracket is going to be a big thing of which teams are going to put together the strategies that really make the puzzle pieces fit for them. I think that this playoffs bracket could see some pretty wild strategies, some pretty crazy picks, some pretty crazy builds. And so whatever teams come out swinging and come out with a plan and executes on that really well, especially in a meta like this one, it's going to be really cool to see happen. And we're going to see some pretty unexpected things, I can say.
And I certainly look forward to that. It's always nice when you kind of have a bit of a mini reset here. A lot of different strategies, like you said, that could be potentially brought to that table. You don't really know what to quite expect. There's no one good answer, like you said as well. I mean, that's just what makes a really good innovation the primary directive for teams to make sure they're capitalizing on who's the most inventive, but also who's the most efficient on top of that. You can't sacrifice one for the other. It's going to require a good balance of the two to make your way for success. Alrighty, guys. That's a good recap there of that little recipes bonus that we have now being added into the mix. But let's talk about something else that's been interesting recently, especially when it comes to Unstoppable. The leaderboards, man. We got some interesting score charts to look at. We got Stormcallers, Seismic Shockwaves, and Wild Inferno all sporting only one set loss across the season. Based on what we know from these teams, what do we expect to see from each that might be a bit more distinct as they all vie for that championship? I'm going to open this one to the board. Who wants to talk first about it? Give me some stuff.
I think it's also great that we have these competitive teams where it's not easy to determine who's really going to win. They're all kind of fighting for it. And I'm looking right now, and it's hysterical because Wild Inferno lost to Stormcallers, albeit in FF. We don't really know how it's going to go, but they have the loss to Stormcallers. Stormcallers has their only loss to Shockwaves, and Shockwaves has their only loss to Wild Inferno. So it's kind of like it's a little love triangle we got going on there, where it's like rock paper scissors. Wild Inferno beats Shockwave. Shockwave beats Stormcaller. Stormcaller beats Wild Inferno. So it's a lot of interesting things to think of going through. But I gotta say, I think if I had to pick a team, I think it's Wild Inferno. If Slim the Rebel had 1 million fans, I'd be one of them. If he had 100 fans, I'd be one of them. And if he had 1 fan, I'd be that fan. I think Slim the Rebel. I've been watching him, and I think he's really going to be a big component with this Wild Inferno coming through. And I think that might be what they need to really kind of push themselves for championships this year, or this season.
Oh, yeah. I think each and every team is capable of taking home that trophy. And so even though at least standings wise, it's a three-man race, man, anyone can come out swinging here. Like these teams, when you have 2 other teams that you know are the main threats to your bracket run, that's what you're focusing on. And so I'm actually very interested to see what the other side of the field comes up with, because that's where the surprise comes out. These teams aren't going to be as practiced against you. Their bracket isn't it's not as decided by what you do on their minds. And so that's where we see a lot of room for innovation and a lot of room for team strategies and things like that. Maybe the pressure's a little off if you're a lower seed, you get into the swing, you see a team that's not as practiced against what you want to do, and then you come out and you make an upset, man. That's what I'm looking for.
Those dark horses are certainly fun to watch. So hopefully going to be seeing that come in. Sun, you got anything else to add there?
I mean, I think the one thing that I'm really interested to see about is if the bracket ends up that way, because Stormcallers are seed 2 and Wild Inferno are seed 1, so it'll be really interesting to see if those two meet up in the finals, who would end up winning, because again, their match was week 1 match, and unfortunately Wild Inferno forfeit that match, so they haven't even played each other yet, but they both have won 6 sets and lost 1, and so it'll be really interesting to see if those two teams ever face up against each other. And I think the whole lower half of the bracket have an incredibly even chance against one another, which is really scary to think of, because there's a lot of good teams down there. So
it's going to be real. I like just the idea that, it's like what Ken said, when you have that lowered expectations of you and everyone else at the top, they're all scrounging between each other. They're not really focused on those lower picks, right? So they're all in interesting positions, like you said, Son. They have opportunities to vie for that title spot. There's definitely upset potentially in this bracket that could turn everything on its head. And once one giant falls, the rest might follow suit because all they've been focused on are those other top contenders. So there's a lot of intrigue here in what could go down for this first round Unstoppable. I've certainly got my eye on it. Definitely do not be sleeping on these lower divisions. Just because these players are drafting down lower in the waterfall does not mean they're not capable of some interesting play here. And I certainly look forward to seeing it. Continuing right along here.
Not to mention, though, I mean, season of celebration. Now there might be some of these middle of the pack teams that might be cooking a little bit with some of their
Exactly.
So it might be something we got to keep an eye out for, just a little bit, you know. So, and I'm sure one team will be celebrating in the season celebrations come the end, but I'm excited to see. I think it's going to be I think this bracket is probably going to be the most competitive.
Absolutely, and that's really great to see from the premiere of the Unstoppable division. They're starting off with a bang, which you gotta love it, man. Continuing right along here, Season 3 of SDL seen a handful of games where Unstoppable players, in fact, have ascended as emergency subs in higher divisions to great success. One example that comes to my mind is the game, Week 6 Divine Dark Omen versus Wild Inferno, where Lior, Seismic Shockwaves, Unstoppable mid laner, thrashed the competition. Legitimately, I thought that that was that team's premier player, and then I found out that's the emergency sub coming in, cleaning house. When Kingslayers, in this case, square off against them, or when any team is up against a team with a premier talent like that, how do you strategize? Do you focus all attention onto shutting down that threat, or do you accept that that person will inevitably thrive and work to wear down the other parts of the team?
It's incredibly difficult for a mid laner to be your central focus as well, because again, they can have teammates rallying from both sides of the map. Mages have the most gods in the game, so you can't really ban them out very effectively during the banning phase. And so it's really difficult to just always look towards focusing just one player in the mid lane like that. But if they can do their best to shut down this Seismic Shockwaves mid laner, I definitely feel like that they would have a decent chance there. And again, I think all of these teams have a really decent chance. I think this will be the most competitive top 8 of the bracket out of all the other divisions. So it'll be really interesting to see.
I think there's so much star talent, at least within the teams that we really want to look at as well. There's so much talent and so much of a potential to take over a game that there really isn't one thing that you have to pin onto. And that's what you see with a lot of really, really good teams here, is that there isn't really you can't target out one player. You gotta take around everything everything that they stand on. And even if there's a player that really, really likes to be the person that carries a game and runs through it, if you target out that one player, you're allowing everybody else around them to rise and maybe get an advantage of their own. When there's a player that loves to be ahead and loves to do well, if they're the best player on their team, they know how to play from behind as well. Everybody else on that team, if they're capable of taking advantage of something, they will. And so you can't just target out this specific element of a team. You have to tackle them on everything that they can do. You need to take down a team on everything that they're strong at, or they're just not going to fully crumble around you. You can crack them, but you can't break them.
And to kind of piggyback off what Ken said, you really have a lot of players that can just kind of show up and do what they need to, and there's not one specific player that's carrying you. And you can tell from these teams that they really play as a team, and they have star players, not just one, because they consistently have been winning throughout the season. Players that really have a star carry will win a lot early. They might win the first 3 to 4 games early, but then as other teams realize, all right, we need to sit on this guy and then do something about him, then you start seeing that kind of maybe a checkerboard of losses, or maybe their winning streak just stops completely and there's no more after that. These teams only have one loss, and that's to each other. So it seems like there's a lot of mind games going on, trying to figure out how to manipulate through maybe, all right, we got to weaken one of the carries and then bolster ours, and then try not to let them weaken our secondary carry out. It's a lot of intricate thought probably going on here, where a lot of people are contributing as much as they can, and it's not as easy as, all right, sit in middle lane, sit in dual lane, sit in solo lane. So I know I'm personally very excited for these playoffs, seeing these 3 teams play, but I don't want to kind of talk away some of the other teams that are in here, because You never know who might have some last second changes. We're talking about these teams because we think they have the best opportunities based on their record, but you have no idea what Dark Omen might be hiding, what Kingslayers might be hiding, what Sunbreakers might be hiding too, because they could be hiding. Maybe they all of a sudden they found their stride, or they've been kind of holding off because they know, all right, league play is important, but it's not the end all be all. So maybe we got our jungler who's a deadly Thanatos. So now we're going to use that in game one, and then maybe we have a second one for him or something. Like, they don't want to play their hand. So I don't think you can really discount the other teams in this league.
For sure.
But I think definitely the main three, Wild Inferno, Shockwaves, and Stormcallers, definitely have a recipe for what they're doing that kind of works, not really based on a end-all be-all plan.
And that's
Keyword being recipe there, man.
That's also not to mention that, again, there was a bit of a break in between playoffs and the end of the weeks, and so with the season of celebration, we don't know who's necessarily scrimming. We don't know who's necessarily playing together and practicing with that extra time that they have before the playoffs. So that's definitely something else to keep in mind as well, that some of these teams that are kind of middle of the pack, that aren't these big top three that have only lost once each, some of these middle of the pack teams could easily be practicing a lot more for this than they maybe necessarily were for the week plays from weeks 1 through 7.
Yeah. Hopefully teams aren't letting their leaderboard standings affect their disposition as far as what they need to do to get into the playoffs mindset, because, yeah, like you said, we have this week, right? Spend it wisely. Put some time in there. I mean, we know that up at the top there, Godlike oftentimes doesn't have too much time on their hands, but hopefully down here on the opposite side for Unstoppable, hopefully they got something whipping up. Hopefully they're making sure that they are locking down that synergy, just not getting out all the little kinks, all the little bumps, all the little speed bumps that could potentially unhinge their playoff run. So hopefully people are going to iron out those things, make it all smooth, and that way they have a nice game plan here coming into these playoffs, can really kick things off with a bang week 1. Alrighty, that being said, Gear mentioned the fact that, we don't want to discount these players. There's a lot of talent here. Indeed there is. In fact, Unstoppable Division this season especially, it's the first season of Unstoppable, but Unstoppable Division is a real melting pot of that talent. We have players here coming on board for their first competitive Smite experiences, and then they're right next to battle-tested SDL veterans who have been here and seen everything there is to see before. Someone that comes to my mind, we've mentioned it before, Slim the Rebel. When the experience range between two players on the same side can be that wide, how does that change the gameplay aspects, like maybe gods we see being played on the field?
I definitely go for it.
Ahead, Sun.
I'm going to toss one to Sun first. You go.
All right.
Yeah, it's fine.
I mean, as far as gods go, I mean, a lot of the players that have been playing for a while in SDL or in draft leagues in general, or Smite leagues in general, they know what picks are strong and which ones are not when it comes to competitive play, whereas someone who is brand new to draft leagues as a whole, first time in SDL, they might have some really good gods that they think are very strong, but when it comes to competitive conquest and on the conquest map, just aren't nearly as effective, especially when there's a 5-person coherent team on the flip side. I mean, a good thing that I always think of is like assassins, right? Is like Arachne back in the day, she could just tear through casuals in Conquest all the time because those people aren't in a 5v5 call with each other, calling out where the Arachne is at all stages of the game, and so she could just go on a tear very easily and effectively. Meanwhile, into a 5-person team, you can't do that as effectively if there are strong comms between those 5 members, and so that's something that new players have had to have learned here in the first few weeks and then going into playoffs, whereas the veteran players already knew when it comes to their god pools and what it is that they're looking at between these different team comps, and not to mention meta as well. Again, if it's your first draft league, a lot of these players maybe don't really care too much about the meta. They just like playing the gods that they like to play. And so that's something else that they have had to learn, is that, okay, yeah, the meta is the meta for a reason. These are the good characters. I should be playing these. So, and it'll be really interesting to see for the playoffs if maybe we see some of these pocket picks. Because again, like I just mentioned, Arachne, she looks incredibly strong because of the buffs that she received for the Season of Celebration. So maybe that is a pick that people are going to be playing, and it would be really interesting to see. And I see Deelo's a little bit happy about that one.
Arachne, bro.
I love Arachne too. So, but yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Gear, anything to add there?
So I think one of the big things you gotta remember, especially when it comes to Son of the Rebel, I know they're kind of like hyping him up, talking him up, but it's also because he's been from season one SDL, right? So we've known him and watched him, and it's been fun to kind of just see his path. And the problem with that though is that there's a lot of tape on him, right?
True.
And you hear me sitting talking about it, and this might even be a detriment to him because now all of a sudden he's going to be looked at a bit more with like under a microscope, right? So it's these SDL veterans that maybe are more of a recognizable name that now are going to be targeted more. So
True.
you're going to be like, all right, well, we hear them talking about Slim, we hear them talking about some of these other players on the team right now. So maybe we should start looking more towards them, right? And now you got a whole history of what gods they play, what they're gonna do. We know Stoops has been in some of these too, so you can say, all right, what is Stoops like playing for support? What is King
Hmm.
of Darkness like playing for support? What is we got Dashiway in some of these games too. So these veterans
Yeah.
now are a bit under a microscope, and there's a lot more receipts to show how they play, who they play, and what they do. This season, I will say the meta has changed drastically over the years that SDL has been apart, but it's easy to identify patterns of the playstyle of some of these veterans. So I think some of these newer players who, especially in Unstoppable, where we don't get a chance to cast some of these games because there's just so many of them, they can kind of hide what they're doing a little bit better. But these veteran players, they're out there. You can see exactly how they play, what they do, and though we might think that they're amazing, how great, what division we think they should be in, how well they play, it's all there to see. So they have to get creative, while the newer players can kind of stick to what's comfortable, kind of forcing the veterans to either become predictable or go out of their comfort zone. And I think that's what's going to show the success of these veterans is how well they can either how strong they are when they are predictable, where it's a point where it's an unstoppable force and there's nothing you can't put a movable object in front of it, or whether they find a way around these walls that they're trying to be made to stop them. As well, it's up to these new players to figure out how to be this force to stop the veterans and what they can do. Can they do what they do? Can they do what the veterans do, but better? Can they do something different than what the veterans do, which just throws off the whole rest of the enemy team? So being the newer player, you have that advantage of being unpredictable in your own way. If you're the veteran, you kind of also have the fear aspect too, because now they're like, oh my gosh, we're playing against Slim. Oh my gosh, we're playing against Stooms. We're playing against Dash. It's you got that kind of fear. So I'd say there's advantages and disadvantages to being known, but also having the receipts to show what you're known for.
Hmm. Very true. There's that interesting balance there that they're gonna have to keep in mind when you're once again when you're studying up on these players, and also like you said, we have the very well-known people who are going to naturally have a bit more scrutiny, and then there's the undercurrent, right? Those players, the rising stars that you might not see coming, but with how tight these brackets are, could very well be your undoing. Ken, I'm gonna have a little mini follow-up for you. So we talked maybe just a little bit about what we're going to see on the battlefield here as far as changes because of that interdynamic between the new and the old as far as the players go. How does it maybe change other aspects such as the dynamic within the team, something that we don't really get an insight into? What do we see there when it comes to this mix of those veterans versus the newbies on the block?
Oh yeah. So having a veteran and a new player on a team, it's something that I'm very much I very much used to being raised in the SDL and having that experience all the way through.
Playing
It
casual with
is
me.
yeah. There's a lot of stress on a veteran player when you have someone new on your team that needs a little bit of guidance, and it's a really big test for your ability to not only play your game and play it out to make the people on the team that are relying on you proud, but also to help these newer players along and allow them to find their comfort zones and where they're strong, and allow them to have spots where they shine as well. Because
Mhm.
when a newer player to comp, they're not necessarily a worse player than the veterans. They're just not as used to playing in that style of play where you don't have to be the only person out for yourself. You're communicating with all your teammates, and you have to come up with a plan with everybody else. And so I think what really separates the top of the top within these kinds of the divisions and games, it's a lot of which veterans are really able to unite their team and lead their team, and which teams haven't just found their place just yet as a unit. it's a really big test, and it's a lot for these kinds of players. It's a big ask for someone to really take the reins on something like that, and so it's really cool watching it.
For sure. I mean, sometimes you need to step up as a mini coach there when you have someone who is a bit unfamiliar with the terrain, needs to get their bearings, show them the ropes a little bit. It's good to always encourage that healthy atmosphere here because that's what makes good players. That's what makes good players and a great players, in fact. Because for all you know, the person who just showed up here in the SDL, brand new, Season 3, could very well be top of Godlike Season 4. You never know. All it takes is a bit of potential.
Kind of going back to what you're saying too, this is the melting pot division as well. So I mean, somebody who doesn't have a name in competitive, this is their first time playing, but are mechanically very strong, but nobody knows who they are. They didn't necessarily draft that player, and that player made their way all the way down to the unstoppable division. So that's also something that has to be kind of looked at a little bit. And again, there's not any VOD of any of these players here for the first few weeks, and so there's not really a way of knowing just how strong these players are until we get to see them here in the playoffs.
Very, very true. And speaking of, when it comes to the novelty, recognizing that for these competitive Smite players now, many of them just first time on the playoffs podium for this SDL. So I'm going to ask this one specifically to my friends who are veterans of the SDL as well, especially playing in the field. That's going to be Gear and Akamaru. Sorry, son, you're new. But as far as words of wisdom, if you could just give a brief little mantra for our friends who are maybe starting to feel those playoffs jitters, what would you say for anyone who's maybe a bit anxious to step up for the occasion?
I would say just treat it like it's any other game. You wanna, because every game should feel the same to you. You should be playing to win, not to not lose, and just have a plan. So there's something always to fall back on, and then have a backup. So it's a plan and an idea to kind of stop bleeding. But these are all intricacies. Just kind of treat it like it's a normal game. Go in and just have fun with it, because it is a video game after all, right? And if it goes bad, it goes bad. Learn from it, but just do your best to try to have fun. And that's what the whole SDL is about. And that's when I was a captain for a team in Season 2, the first thing I told them was like, look, we want to make sure we have fun first, respect each other, and we want to stay friends after this. So just try to have fun is the best advice I can give, and it's worked for me.
Why are you so angry during our casuals then, Gear?
Because Deelo, the headaches you give me and the migraines, they last weeks, Deelo. They last weeks.
My bad, yo.
There's damage, Deelo.
I love
there is damage there.
Wow.
I love this death because you and Sun are the biggest ragers.
Okay, all right.
No. I don't rage. I hype. I don't rage. I hype. So like,
all right, you hype Sun?
Yeah, I get
Listen,
mad, but I also get excited.
I don't rage. I just mauled. Okay.
Valid.
I'm going in. I got him. I'm gonna pull them all up. Where's everybody? Like, Son, we told you to hold back. We didn't expect you to get a quad. Sorry that the 1 health carry killed you, but maybe you waited 5 seconds.
Listen, man, just get in there with me, and I won't have a problem. Okay.
No, you're right. Play with Nublet then, bro. You know I'm hanging.
Yeah, Nublet and I get in there, so.
I'm waiting for Green Buff to spawn. I'm waiting for Ken to drop that John for me.
Yeah.
There was an assault match with Nublet, and he was a little Cupid. All he just kept saying is, fight me. Fight me. Fight me. And they would run from this little cherub, and it was the most funniest thing to see.
I'd fear him if he was coming at me too. That's a scary man right there. All right, guys.
Make that a shirt.
A little Cupid just saying, fight me. Little fight me. I like that. I mean, his emoji, his little sticker in the Discord, Loki just got that same vibe. All right. Enough stress, though, guys. Let's guess. We're going to talk about some predictions here. I'm going to say every round bracket here for round 1, and I'm going to count to 3, and you guys are going to each give me your thoughts just right off the cuff of what team you think is going to win. So, for round 1, we're going to start off with Wild Inferno taking on Eclipse, okay? 3, 2, 1.
Wild Inferno.
Wild Inferno. That's unanimous. I mean, listen. We're all Slim fans. I'm sorry. Hey,
it's only because he's been such a veteran in this, and he's such a fun guy. So that's a nice experience with him. Yeah,
makes sense, man. But
Eclipse, the record kind of speaks for them.
Yeah, I mean, like Eclipse. Who knows? They could, for real. They got the name for it. They could be the dark horse, bro. They could just pull up out of nowhere, just absolutely make a tear All you know is that one change in the meta can be all you need for Wild Inferno's entire game plan to just be unraveled. So, Eclipse, it's your job to prove us wrong. We look forward to seeing it. All right, next up, Flourish versus Dark Omen. 3, 2, 1.
Flourish.
Dark
Omen.
Omen.
Ooh, I heard some dissent. Hold on, who said Flourish?
I said Flourish.
Son, I'd like to hear your reason, the dissenting opinion. Please go.
Flourish 2-0 Dark Omen. So, and then they're set in the weeks. So
Oh.
I have a feeling that, I mean, even if it was a close 2-0, you already have that confidence going into this round one. So I think the confidence will be enough for them to pull out. Even if they don't necessarily 2-0 again, I still think the confidence will be enough.
Valid.
Man, that could be the detriment. You think, all right, we have this, we beat them before, and I'm looking at these, and Dark Omen, some of their losses have just been a 1-2. Most of Flourishes have just been the 0-2s. So
Well, I mean, confidence and ego are two different things. If they're feeling strong
fair
about
enough,
it,
fair
but they're being respectful about it, I think they got it easily.
exactly, I agree too, because you have that confidence going in, but you don't want to kind of let it be overconfidence.
Yep.
Good arguments for
just-
both sides there.
I think just knowing the players on Dark Omen, it feels like that roster could challenge anybody on Unstoppable. Like that's a really, really good team that they have. If they I'm not confident in saying saying that they've been playing their absolute try hard best this whole season. They could just find a spot, turn it on, and say we're just gonna win everything, and they'll just do it. Like I think they have that potential. I think they could make a really, really good run this season.
I like that. I like this bracket between the 4th and 5th place of the division because between both of them, I think there's some good upset potential. And like we've been saying the entire time, that's what we want to see. We want to see some stories be made here. Alrighty, carrying right along, we have 2nd place versus 7th. Seismic Shockwaves versus the Kingslayers. 3, 2, 1.
Shockwaves.
Shockwaves.
It's unanimous there. Shockwaves has been a threat.
Yeah.
Going to continue to be a threat. Lior's on that team. I'm scared. I'm going to make, in this case, representative for the speaking is going to be, let's say, Ken. Talk to me about why you think Shockwaves.
Shockwaves are just a dominant force, man. They have I after talking to them a little bit, I've been able to get a little bit of insight into their team dynamic. They're just the squad, man. These guys are super, super tight. They talk together all the time. They develop strategies together, and they really, really, really have a really united team bond. I think that Shockwaves, more than almost any other team, plays the game as a 5-man squad rather than say we're just gonna let you go crazy. They're a very solid roster, and they just keep improving. They keep talking about what they could have done better, and they're all very, very open. And so I think that this team, more than anybody else, is probably the least likely to fall to an upset because they have just the strongest bond out of any team that I've seen in this division.
And the real SDL, as we've always said, are the friendships we made along the way. So,
Yeah.
get that unlocked. Might have boo friendship. Boo you. Get out of here. Anyway,
Let's get King of Darkness's ring.
last
Oh, geez.
one we have here for the predictions. Make it good. Stormcallers, 3rd place versus Sunbreakers, 6th place. 3, 2, 1.
Stormcallers.
Three. Yeah.
Unanimous, and I'm going to have Gear as the representative for Stormcallers. Talk to me about why they're going to win.
I wanted to say Sunbreakers because I was like, oh, it'd be cool to have a nice upset. I know Cactus Arms won Divine last season with his team, but Stormcallers have just been completely dominant, with their only loss being to Shockwaves, and it was a 1-2 as well. So it's kind of hard to really root. It's not to root, but to kind of expect anything else. I can root for Sunbreakers, but when push comes to shove, I think that Stormcallers really kind of take the cake in this one.
Valid. Devil's Advocate, Sunbreakers are the dynasty behind them. They can't let that go. You can't let the dynasty go. The first one that just gets taken out, man, the legacy is lost. So hopefully Sunbreaker is going to recognize the weight on their shoulders to carry it forward and bring home the W. But that being said, that's all we have here for now. Stick around in just a bit. We're going to be talking some Divine for you. But that being said, at least for the moment, this has been the lower division unstoppable panel for the playoffs. I've been Deelo, joined here by CogChamp, Suun, and Akamaru Ken. Thank you guys very much for watching. We'll be right back in just a moment.
Hello, and I hope you are enjoying the playoff predictions and discussions for this first round of the Smite Draft League playoffs. Keep your eyes tuned to discord.gg/SDL for all the upcoming fundraising and exciting stuff regarding playoff streams, and we'll see you soon on the Smite Draft League.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Hope you didn't miss us too much. Consistent casters, different division. I'm Deelo, joined here by your little cog champ, Gearchief, Suun, and Akamaru7, otherwise known as Ken. We're here to talk some Divine, folks. Let's get right into it. We're going to start here with the cream of the crop. We got Kingslayers and we got the Stormcallers. That's first place and second place, respectively. Different journeys, but both with incredible performances. Walk me through here the mentality you approach playoffs with as the team that was once scorned by caster predictions that is here to prove a point versus the team that has nothing to prove and has gone 2-0 in every single set they've played. Suun, let's start with you.
I mean, for Kingslayers, it's always scary for a team if they've gone 2-0 and everything going into playoffs because they will typically have a bit of an ego to them, right? They will definitely feel like we are the best. It is very obvious we have 2-0'd all the other competition, and so we're just going to not even scrim. We're going to just completely wash everyone. And so if they come in with that ego a little bit, and same goes for Stormcallers as well. Again, they only lost to the Kingslayers. So if they come in with that same ego of, oh, we'll just meet them in the finals, and then we'll deal with them then, but we don't have to deal with any of the other competition after the fact. I mean, if these teams come in with that, it's going to be a very difficult matchup here in the in the playoffs because you're just not going to be able to give the respect, especially with the new meta shifts coming in as well with the season of celebrations. I mean, some of these teams that might be middle of the pack might have something crazy new or have some god that got buffed that now they can go ahead and play. I mean, Raijin's looking incredibly strong right now, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's some Raijin players out there that haven't gotten their moment to shine until just now. So
Literally, the only one I can think of is Kingfisher. But you're right, pride cometh before the fall. So you're going to have to make sure that you're keeping your ego in check. Otherwise, you might just lose hold of everything you've worked so hard for. Ken, Gearchief, anything to add there on terms of what the mentality difference is there?
I think you really gotta watch out because we see Eclipse and Shockwaves are kind of in the middle of the pack there, and they have lost 0-2 to these two titans of teams that they're facing. But like Sun said, there's been changes, and some of them have been big changes, like we were talking about previously. Is these dishes, right? So you have no idea if that'll change anything. If all of a sudden one of these middle teams will be able to use the dishes more effectively, or some type of map change or whatever. Like Sun said, some of these god changes. A lot has happened throughout this whole season, so it all really matters that they can just kind of upend them in one set, right? And especially when some of these teams feel as confident as they are, if you can put them on the back foot, let's say you take a quick game from them because you pull out something they don't expect, and then all of a sudden they're reeling from it and they can't contemplate or can't really correct themselves from game one, and they're just so taken back at how that just happened that it might start getting in their heads and then in their mentals, and then it could just crumble them for the next one after that. So you can't really count out any of these middle of the pack teams as well. So, and it's definitely one of the more competitive seasons I think we've had in the SDL.
It's in fact a similar story that we saw in Divine last season with Divine Flourish headed by Zetan there, where they went undefeated, and because of that, sometimes you're a bit unused to being on that back foot, don't quite know what to do when you're on the defensive end, and unfortunately, they didn't quite come up with it. They were always a bridesmaid, never a bride, coming up second place in Sunbreakers, so interesting to see if Kingslayers will meet the same fate or if they will finish the job this time, not get too cocky before it's all said and done. But along that line of dominant threats, Wyvern, jungle of Divine Kingslayers has been such a potent force and a key reason for the success as a team. What are the implications for the rest of the team's dynamic when that key talent rests on the jungle's shoulders versus a different role maybe? Ken, what are your thoughts?
When you have a really dominant jungle on the enemy team, it really becomes about watching rotations and warding. There's a really big difference when you have a team that's really managing their mobility around the map and being able to keep track of the enemy team at all times, as opposed to a team that might not be as used to playing around something like that. It's not an impossibility, even if that jungler is, say, more mechanically inclined than the rest of the players on one team. But it becomes a really difficult point where when the jungler is the problem, you really, really, really need to be taking vision control, and you really need to have really tight communication. You need to be playing as the better team overall. Wyvern is just a dominant force. He knows how to pick his fights, he knows where to go, and he knows where to get kills.
Yeah.
And so when you're playing against something like that, when Wyvern is so strong and the rest of his team behind him is doing so well behind him, you really, really need to watch where he's going and make sure that we're not gonna let him get ahead. We're gonna try to sap his farm. We're gonna rotate to where he's going and nullify what he's doing. It's a really big game that you have to play. It's not impossible, and we've seen games where Wyvern has been exploited a little bit. It's going to be a game of where Kingslayers have to focus on, we need to make other win conditions so that everybody else is rising and becomes a threat alongside Wyvern. And other teams have to say, okay, well, this guy's the problem. Can we either just make sure he never gets anything on us, or do we just take everybody else down? Do we focus rotations elsewhere?
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of options available. It's a really scary threat, though, because wherever I've seen Wyvern go, he's gotten something out of it. And I'm glad that I'm not a player in that season. He is so scary.
I bet he drops green buffs so well. But yeah, no, Wyvern's a fantastic player. Certainly a key threat to watch out for. And it's that same question that we asked during the Unstoppable desk, of the question being, when you have that premier threat, what's your strategy to take them down? Do you ignore them? Do you focus them hard? It's the question that's going to be on everyone's lips. But we can talk about Wyvern all day here. Let's maybe zoom out a little bit here. Because even though Wyvern is the name that many in Divine whisper in fear, there are plenty more heavy hitters who we will see on the battlefield. Gear, Suun, as far as other performances that we're maybe particularly anticipating, do any other names come to mind?
Swagmaster in the solo lane for Stormcallers is one that I always think of. I have been very impressed with him over there in the short lane this season, and I definitely feel like if he can get the leads that we've seen him get in a lot of these games over there in the solo lane, he can be a monster on some of these rotations. So that's a name that comes to my mind immediately.
Valid. For one, I mean, I'm just a mere host, but for one that comes to my mind is going to be Ganondad. I feel like Ganondad snuck by jungle for Seismic Shockwaves. Such a threat. Can play Ao Kuang like he's at his peak, even though the god's seen some hits in his heyday. So I'm very worried about, honestly, that jungle. I mean, we know that Wyvern's been the jungle that's been on everyone's minds, but nonetheless, you can't sleep on this man. He will bop you if you're not warding up, you're not paying attention to what's going on in the other lanes. Can certainly make a lot happen. And I mean, Ken said it best. When you have that jungle as one of your premier threats, it makes every lane an absolute minefield. You never want to take a step out of tier 1 tower. You just really got to make sure you're on your A game as far as stepping up at the right time for the right reason. So hopefully all these teams are going to make sure that they're throwing respect on all of these premier threats names. It's not just Wyvern to talk about. There is plenty of talent that you should be putting some respect on before you go dismissing their game. But behind the top threats of Kingslayers and Stormcallers, there's a pretty solid middle pack of teams that are vying for superiority. As one of those teams that is not quite falling behind, but also not quite staying ahead, what is your path to maybe beating the odds? Gear, what are your thoughts?
I think you got to really play through your carries. So we are talking about Swagmaster and the Shockwaves, and we know Swagmaster's a really big force in that solo lane. And Shockwave also has Rayhum too, which personally is playing against him in Season 2. He is a threat that you have to consider. You can't just ignore him or treat him like any other mid. You have to have some type of plan, whether it's who you're going to ban out or how you're going to attack him. You can't give him hell. Tiamat is a big question mark too, because you can win if he's Tiamat, but it's not going to be easy. So you have to have a plan at that point. Like, all right, we got to dive the team out. We got to force this stuff out. We got to push him away or something. There has to be a plan. And if Seismic Shockwaves can really take advantage of Rayhum and Swagmaster and find a way to kind of work them together, I think they really have a chance to stand on their own. It's just a matter of playing through these two players and not letting the one player in the Kingslayers like Wyvern really disrupt all that. But the problem is when it comes to that, the benefit is that you kind of got two people you can rely on. The problem is you kind of need them to work together. So it's a bigger machine, but more moving parts. Where Kingslayers, if it's just Wyvern win, then you can kind of there's less to really worry about and make work together. Just hey Wyvern, kill that thing, and then it's dead. But now it's like Seismic Shock goes, all right, well we need Rayham and Swagmaster to kind of link arms and walk through because if they can do that, then maybe Swagmaster can keep Rayham alive when Wyvern dies. I'm making all these scenarios up, but the idea is 2 versus 1. It's not a lot of fun for the one. So, if I believe if Seismic Shockwaves can kind of work a synergy out there and try to find a way to take advantage of both those players, then they might have the chance. But that's also not considering everyone else in the Kingslayers like Nico Drin or Tortuga, Jungle Phobic, DLC, and we're just considering Wyvern. So Seismic Shockwaves really need the 2 best players to step up big and be equivalent or a little bit under Wyvern, where Wyvern's just kind of standing tall in a team that has players that are tall themselves.
I really like the analogy you gave of bigger machine, but also a lot more moving parts. It makes sense as the chief of all gears. There's a lot of cogs involved in that machine. It's got a lot of spinning wheels, and because of that, you have some weaknesses there. There's some flaws to exploit. Sure, I remember in Game of Thrones they say, what's bigger, 5 or 1? 5. 1. You know? So the fist can smash through the 5 because maybe not as a unit they're not as strong, but at the same time, if the 1 falls, you have nothing left at that point. So there's something to be said. There's pros and cons to either side there. But hopefully each team is going to make sure they're playing to their strengths, recognizing what key parts of your team do build you a path to success and playing around that. Ken, you have anything to add there as far as what these middle pack teams can maybe do to burn their path to victory?
I think it all comes down to planning. At the end of the day, when you're a higher seed team playing a lower seed team, you are coming in there and you're saying that we're going to play our game, they're going to play their game, and we're just going to be better. Because you don't want to bring out all your strategies, all your big stuff when you're facing a lower seed team. Otherwise, the other higher seed teams are going to take that from you, and they're going to know what you're going to want to do.
Yeah.
They are holding things back. If you're a lower seed team and you're looking at these guys and you're saying, how do we beat them? You know that they're going to play the game that they are expected to play. You are an unknown. You don't have as many things figured out in terms of how you play and how the enemy is going to see you. And so if you come out there and you come as a better prepared team against the strategies that they're going to employ, you bring something new to the table and you pull out something that's not expected, but you still do it just as well as anybody else, it's going to give you an inherent advantage. And so although they might be the better seasoned team altogether, you are going to come in with some really good things, to give yourself a lot of chances to bring yourself into it and to make some people really surprised, because it's really about that first step. You get something on a team that didn't expect you to do something against them, and they're going to be flustered for the next hour.
Yeah. Sometimes all it takes is that one knock in someone's confidence. It's like a Jenga tower, man. You pull out the right block, it all comes tumbling down. So you got to make sure that on the reverse side, if you're one of those top teams, you can't let your faith be shaken by one bad game. Even if you're used to that dominance, you have to make sure you keep up those spirits. The mental game, I always say it, can be just, if not more, important than the physical game that you actually play with your hands on the keyboard, on the controller. Because if you believe you've lost, even before you've played the game, you have lost the game. And I just lost the game. And you all just lost the game. If
anyone screw you!
Yeah, I'm sorry, man. I like completely my bad, everyone. Anyway, next question.
You could have kept that to yourself.
I didn't mean to. It's been like middle school since like I've lost.
Yeah, congratulations.
Are you gonna start drawing S's? Are you gonna start drawing the universal S's with your 3 lines down? On your... Do you have that in your notes with your questions?
I was never good at those, dude. I used to suck at art, man. Back then, I was so disappointed. I tried. I could barely do like a cursive S back when we actually taught us how to do cursive in school. Anywho's, that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about final question before we get into some speculation about the leaderboards here. Divine's identity as a division has been kind of challenged a little bit with this season. The addition of Unstoppable makes it no longer the lowest division on the totem pole, and the least experienced players no longer gather there. But it's still, nonetheless, a lower division. If you could choose one god from Smite to represent maybe the vibe of Divine Division, what do you guys think it would be? And how do you feel like that ambiance of Divine Division impacts what we see output from the players. I'm going to first assess the pool here. So think of a god real quick in your mind that really embodies Divine. I'm going to gauge from each of you. So I'm going to start off with my man Ken. Ken, god.
All right, Naja. Here we go.
Naja, okay. Sun.
Great question.
Here.
Me?
Yes.
Fenrir. That's all I
Fenrir
can
and then
think.
Sun. Back to you.
Mulan, it's my favorite.
You
That's
suck.
why I chose Fenrir.
Ken,
You
talk
was
to me
like,
about
127
Naja. Why
gods
do we
to
think
choose to.
that embodies Divine for you?
Naja, Naja. All right. So Naja is like when I pick that god, it's like the all or nothing, right? I'm sending myself right at them. I'm a little bit goofy. I'm a little bit I'm a little bit unhinged, but I know what I'm doing. I'm there for the team, you know.
Yeah.
I think Divine is a very fun division because you still see a lot of things that you don't expect. You see a lot of picks that you don't necessarily see on like higher level divisions or SPL play, but those picks are there because that's what people are comfortable doing, and that's what they think are going to give them a chance with the circumstances they have. There's a lot of meta games going on, and I think that not only not only my boy Vulture being the Sash Master being right in there, but also Naja just being a god that's not only super aggressive and all in, but also very helpful and great to have on really any team that you got. I think that that's a god that's got the vibes of Divine right down there.
Valid explanation, man. All right, back to you, Gear. In that case, Fenrir. Why is that your pick?
Because he's my favorite god, but also I think because
Who was just talking smack about me picking my favorite god? What is this?
Well, I think
What is this?
Fenrir is very jack of all trades type, so you can see your carries such as Wyvern, where Fenrir's kind of like taking games away and just being around every corner, jumping the walls, bringing you to the team, just blowing you up, chasing you down with the brutalize. So you can see the carry, or you can see more of the support roles where Fenrir is kind of in the support soul lane or built more tanky in the jungle, where it's just essentially getting an ult bot, or just kind of get in there and control the whole fight, as just with the stun on the leap, or just kind of brutalizing to keep someone in fight so they can't really blink away. And I don't know. I just think Fenrir can really just shows how these teams are playing, where it's you got the Wyverns who are just carrying versus maybe the supports who are just kind of helping the rest of the team along, or these solos like Swagmaster who's just trying to keep their team in the game versus trying to carry completely.
Valid explanation. And Son, why is Mulan your favorite god?
Let's see if we answer
Oh,
this
I
one.
could. If we want to talk about why she's my
3
favorite god,
max.
I could go on for a while for that. But when it
3
comes
sentences,
to
go.
why I think Mulan is the Divine Division, she's kind of the slept-on pick a little bit. It's not necessarily your top picks that you're going to be looking towards when it comes to gods in most matchups. It's a bit of a counter matchup, and it can either be played very aggressively if you play it over in the solo lane or jungle, but it can also be played very effectively in the support, a little bit laid back and away from the action a little bit, just to try and help out the team. And that's kind of how Divine is. These players aren't necessarily top picked when it came to the other divisions, and they end up here in the Divine, but it's still very solid players nonetheless, and can do a lot with the roles that they are playing for each of their teams. And she's a cool god.
That's how you know. That's how you know this man was a humanities major, bro. He spun that out of nowhere. That was actually well reasoned. All right, valid, man, valid. Okay, guys, enough stress. Let's guess. We're gonna pull up here
Ooh, I like
Divine
that.
brackets, and once again, I'm gonna count down from 3 after reading you the options here. You guys are gonna give me your picks for who's gonna come out on top, and maybe we'll get a bit into why if there's some dissent. So we have for round 1, Kingslayers versus Flourish here. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Kingslayers.
I'm going to have, in this case, representative for the pack. Let's have Gear. Talk to me about why.
Record. I mean, it's Flourish has tried hard. They haven't lost all 2-0s. They got a 1-2 in there against Wild Inferno, but Kingslayer's just been dominant. It's been 2-0, 2-0, 2-0, 2-0. And as much as I want to root for the underdog, it just seems kind of set in stone at this point.
Might be a foregone conclusion there, but nonetheless, going to be interesting to see how it all pans out. Next up, Seismic Shockwaves versus Dark Omen. 4 and 5 is always the interesting one to talk about. So, 3, 2, 1.
Shockwaves.
Unanimous there. Surprising. Okay, I'm gonna have Suun. Talk to me about this one.
I'm gonna be honest. I have been thoroughly impressed by all the players on this team here in this Divine Division when it comes to the Shockwaves. I think this team has a lot of potential. They have some games where they just don't perform very well, and that's okay. You can't perform at your top game every single day, that you could. But overall, over the course of the entire all the weeks going into playoffs, I have been very impressed with this team myself, and I think this team has a lot of potential going into playoffs. And that's why I am voting Shockwaves myself. Is I just think they look really good if they are all on the same page, and I'm hoping they're all on the same page.
That's a team with good synergy, honestly. Having gotten a bit of a sneak peek into their group chats, talking to them a little bit, those guys, they know how to have fun. They get the vibe of SDL, I think, very well down. They play well, but they also get along well, which is both very important aspects to the team. Really, all the food groups you need for success there. All right, matchup number 3, Stormcallers versus Wild Inferno, 2nd versus 7th seed here. Counting down from 3, 3, 2, 1.
Stormcallers.
Unanimous once again, but this one a bit more of a dominant reason why. Ken, talk to me. Why are Stormcallers coming out on top?
I think Stormcallers not only just have the really great head-to-head here, they are just such a good team, man. They have really great vibes all around. Every time I see these guys talking to each other, they always have this air of like, yeah, we trust each other, we're in it with each other, and we're gonna win together. They're all playing at the top of their game when they're in it, and honestly, you can't really pick out one member that's the huge win condition for them. Whereas Kingslayers you can instantly point to them to say like, oh yeah, that's Wyvern. Stormcallers, you kind of have to address everybody on that team. There isn't really a particular weak point that you go to, oh yeah, we're going to take them down. Even if they're playing with their sub, Izus, there's really no aspect of this team that's particularly way stronger or way weaker than the other. They're just a really well-balanced team, and they have a great formula for how they win their games, and I think that's why they've been so successful.
And Stormcallers, I'm sure, feeling great about that after, feeling a bit slept on when it came to those caster first decisions where it was only me. I'm going to put it for the record. Once again, it was only me, even though I didn't put my name on the list because I actually forgot to send it to Anthony. I did support you. I would be wearing my Stormcallers jersey right now.
All right, well, the team's winning, so I'm their biggest fan now. You don't have any record of it. Just trust me.
That's
Source
my baby.
Dude, just trust
that name
me.
is my baby, so I gotta stand by my
Source
Dude, just trust me.
I made it up.
The dad that was late to the softball game, but just when they're about to hit the home run, I'm like, yeah, I see you. I got you. I give them like that hard, loving approval that they were like vying for the entire time. That's me. That's me at the end there. Anyway,
Source Dude, just
Stormcallers, I'm sure will be performing pretty well there at the end. What'd you say, Gear?
Source Dude, just trust me.
Yeah, exactly. You got it, bro. Alrighty. Let's get on to the last matchup here. 3rd seed versus 6th seed. Eclipse versus the Sunbreakers. 3, 2, 1.
Eclipse.
3rd seed going to be coming out on top here. We're not going interesting at all here today, guys. Come on now.
Guess
all
not.
right, in that case, Gear, talk to me. Eclipse,
So,
why?
if you asked me at the beginning of this season, I would have looked at Sunbreakers' team and be like, Sunbreakers, hands down. Because we got a lot of veterans in there. We had Virtually in there, Dark MNS. We had Phoenix in there, and you would have thought these players were just dominant veterans in the SDL. But they've had a bit of a rough season. And Eclipse, I got a friend, Cookie named Joe. I picked him up early in SDL Season 2, and I unfortunately had to trade him, but I picked him up, and I had to sub him in for ADC, and he picked that up. He took to that role really well, and just started really walking through it this season. Like, I remember at the beginning of this season, Season 3, I was asked to help scrim against his team to see where they were at. And after a tough game 1 for them, they really came back in the next 2 games after that, and it was impressive to say the least. And to see how well they're doing right now, it just does not surprise me in the least. I think if anyone can really upset these 2 titans of teams and Kingslayers and Stormcallers, I think Eclipse is a bit slept on.
Valid points all. I mean, gonna have to see. In the first round, it's always the most interesting one because there's that potential for expectations to be completely subverted. And I personally am hoping for Sunbreakers for Phoenix to lead, the better Phoenix, as he likes to call himself, but I'm not going to choose a side on that one. Phoenix, my buddy, the other one. Anyway, I'm looking forward to seeing if they're able to maybe have a little bit of a dark horse moment, a little bit of an underdog comeback there. But that all being said, that is all the time we have here for this lower division playoff panel. I've been Deelo, joined here by little cog champ, Gearchief, Suun, as well as Akamaru7, also known as Ken. Thank you guys very much for joining, and also thank you, the audience, the viewer at home, for watching this. We really appreciate your time. Keep an eye to the sky for more content for the playoffs. Going to be coming at you soon as week 1 gets to a kickoff here. But with that being said, thanks again for watching. Have a good rest of your day.
All you got.
Bye-bye.
Caution. Content's hot. You got to give me all you got. Caution. Content's hot. You got to give me all you got.
Content's hot.